There is a war being waged against the most visible part of you, and the enemy chose that battlefield with terrifying precision. You have been standing in front of mirrors, running your fingers across your scalp, watching what feels like evidence of defeat. And every single time you did, the enemy leaned back and smiled, satisfied that his operation was going undetected. But something shifted the moment you started asking questions. Something cracked in the invisible architecture of the attack the second your spirit stopped accepting "it's just biology" as the final answer. Because the enemy does not waste surgical-level strategy on insignificant targets. He does not deploy slow, calculated, years-long operations against people who don't carry something catastrophically threatening to his agenda. The very fact that he came for your crown, the literal, physical, visible top of your identity, is the confession he never meant to make out loud. You are reading that confession right now, and the panic on the other side of the veil is already beginning. You have been carrying weight that was never yours to carry, and your body has been keeping the score with devastating accuracy. Every relationship that smiled at your face while quietly dismantling your frequency left a biological footprint. Every environment that felt safe but was actually extracting your energy left a hormonal fingerprint. The enemy is a master of slow poison, not the kind that burns your throat and announces itself, but the kind that enters disguised as love, disguised as community, disguised as normal life. He used people who knew your name to execute a strategy so precise it could only have been designed by a kingdom that has been studying you for years. The accumulation of cortisol, the constant low-grade activation of your nervous system, the body-wide alarm signal that never fully deactivated, all of it registered. And the most vulnerable physical system to that kind of chronic spiritual and psychological siege is circulation. Oxygen delivery, follicular nourishment, the very root systems of what grows from your crown. What you saw thinning was not vanity, it was a battlefield report. You won't defeat this attack alone. Breaking these emotional hexes requires a higher code, which is exactly why I just released the 3 keys to a prosperous life trilogy, whose unlocking link is in the pinned comment. Access it before the fog blinds you again. Because what I'm about to reveal in the next paragraphs is the intelligence briefing the enemy has been praying you never receive. The dream that woke you up at 3 a.m., the one where you were running but your legs refused to respond, where the danger was real but your body had turned to stone, was not random neurological misfiring. The enemy operates through the sleep portal with extraordinary confidence because he knows that when your conscious defenses are lowered, the subconscious becomes a battlefield with no guards at the gate. That dream of persecution, of movement without progress, of legs that feel cast in lead while something dark presses closer, is one of the most documented signatures of spiritual monitoring. It carries a physical sensation so specific that once you feel it, you never forget it. The heaviness begins in the chest, radiates down into the hips, and by the time you startle awake, your heart is already racing, as if your body fled something your legs refuse to outrun. The intrusive thought that follows you out of sleep is always the same family of lie. You are stuck, you are behind, you are not moving fast enough. Something is always chasing, and you will never escape it. That thought does not come from your own mind. It is planted, it is injected through the dream frequency by a spiritual assignment whose entire job is to keep you operating from a position of exhaustion before you even open your eyes. The spiritual action happening beneath that dream is a monitoring spirit, documenting your reactions, measuring how long the fear lingers, whether it contaminates your morning, whether it bleeds into your prayers and converts them from declarations into anxious pleading. And the primitive memory it activates is ancient, the deep human cellular terror of being hunted, of being exposed, of being caught before the safe place is reached. But here is what the monitoring spirit cannot afford for you to understand. The fact that it is still chasing you in the dream realm means it has not caught you in the real one. The chase is the failure. The pursuit is the admission that you are ahead. And when you wake up tomorrow from that dream, the counterattack is this. You do not shake it off in silence. You name it out loud. You declare that what pursues you has no legal access to your rest, your peace, your body, or your calling. You break the agreement your fear was making in the dark. The smile that didn't reach the eyes. You have seen it more times than you have allowed yourself to admit. There is a specific category of human being who has mastered the architecture of the poisoned compliment. And if you are a chosen one, carrying visible anointing, you have been in the orbit of at least one of them. They speak the language of admiration fluently. They say the right things in public, affirm your gifts in group settings, and pepper their language with words that sound like blessing. But there is a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible, something that registers below the threshold of conscious thought, where something in their eyes does not follow the performance of their mouth. That micro-expression of contempt, of competitive pain, of spiritual envy, dressed in the costume of celebration, is one of the most dangerous energetic transfers that can happen in a social interaction. Because your nervous system registers it even when your mind gives them the benefit of the doubt. The body never lies. The slight tension at the base of your skull after spending time with certain people. The inexplicable fatigue that follows a conversation that should have been energizing. The way your creativity dims after being in certain rooms, as if someone quietly turned a dial down on the frequency you were operating in. This is narcissistic spiritual warfare in its most sophisticated form. The operation that never leaves fingerprints because it is carried out entirely through energy, through projection, through the invisible warfare of a spirit that cannot stand to see you thrive. Psychologically, the narcissist does not simply want what you have. That would be manageable. They want to dissolve who you are and absorb it into their own identity, because your authenticity is a mirror that shows them their own emptiness, and they cannot tolerate the reflection. Spiritually, that envy carries weight. It moves, it attaches, and it specifically targets the follicular system, the crown, because in the spiritual architecture of the human body, the top of the head represents covering, authority, and divine assignment. The enemy sends his agents to complement your crown while quietly placing hooks into it. But every hook has a name, and every name can be broken. They copied your style, your language, your aesthetic, your spiritual vocabulary. And when you noticed, you talked yourself out of what you saw because you were trained to believe that pointing it out made you arrogant. But the blatant copy is not about imitation born from admiration. It is about a spirit of assignment that follows anointing with one specific objective: to replicate the container while destroying the carrier. The one who copies does not want what you have built. They want to become who you are, because what you are carries a frequency that they cannot generate on their own, and the closest they can get to inhabiting it is to wear it like a costume, while the original is being slowly dismantled behind the scenes. The physical sensation associated with this dynamic is subtle but constant, a low-grade feeling of being watched, observed, catalogued. Not the clean kind of observation that comes from genuine admiration, but the extractive kind that comes from a spirit of monitoring that is taking notes, filing information, and feeding it back to a network of assignment. The intrusive thought that accompanies this experience is corrosive. Maybe I was never original. Maybe they are doing it better. Maybe what I carry is replaceable. That thought is not yours. It was engineered specifically to make you abandon your post, because a chosen one who walks away from their assignment in discouragement leaves a vacancy that the counterfeit is positioned to fill. The spiritual action at work here is one of the oldest in the enemy's playbook. Contaminate the original by elevating the copy until the chosen one can no longer distinguish their own voice from the echo. The divine response is ferocious in its simplicity. Return to the source. You cannot be replicated at the level of anointing. The costume can be copied, the calling cannot. And the moment you stop competing with the copy and return to creating from the authentic frequency of your assignment, the copy becomes irrelevant because it has no source to draw from anymore. The weight on your chest in the hours before dawn is a phenomenon so consistent among chosen ones that it has been documented across cultures, across centuries, across every spiritual tradition that has ever taken the invisible realm seriously. You wake up at 3 a.m. at 3:33 at the threshold hours of the night, and something is pressing down on you. Not metaphorically, but with physical, almost gravitational force. Your breath is shallow. Your limbs feel as if something is pinning them. The room looks the same as it always does, but it feels occupied in a way that makes your skin respond before your mind can process. This is sleep paralysis, the physical manifestation of a spiritual visitation that your body is experiencing in full while your conscious mind is not yet operational enough to engage its defenses. The enemy specifically targets these threshold hours because they are the hours when the veil between the physical and spiritual dimensions is at its thinnest. He deploys assignment into those hours not to destroy you. If he could destroy you, he would have already. But to exhaust you, to drain the reserves that will be needed for the day that follows, to interrupt the deep restorative sleep cycles during which God does some of his most intimate reconstruction work in your physiology and your spirit. The primitive memory activated in those moments reaches back to the oldest human fear, the fear of being immobilized in the presence of danger, the primal terror of paralysis when survival demands action. But the spiritual truth running beneath the sleep paralysis attack is this: it is only targeting you because what is being built inside you during sleep is so significant that the enemy is willing to risk exposure to interrupt it. He doesn't press down on empty vessels. He doesn't deploy nighttime operations against assignments that don't threaten him. The weight on your chest is the enemy's desperation wearing a physical disguise. You have watched the light bulbs blow out at specific moments, in the middle of a conversation that was shifting something inside you, during worship, during the precise second when a revelation was cresting. You have watched electronics malfunction with inexplicable timing. You have experienced the uncanny coordination of material disruption that seems to cluster around moments of spiritual intensity. This is not coincidence. This is not aging infrastructure or power grid inconsistency. The burned-out light bulb is a physical signature of the electromagnetic interference that occurs when a high-frequency spiritual encounter causes the ambient energy in a physical space to spike beyond what certain objects can sustain. Chosen ones operating in elevated spiritual frequency carry a measurable energetic field, not metaphorically, but in the literal sense that the human nervous system generates electromagnetic output that can be amplified exponentially during states of deep prayer, prophetic activation, or spiritual combat. The enemy's monitoring assignments are not passive observers. They create interference, they attempt disruption, they probe for any material channel through which they can inject distraction into a moment of divine clarity. The physical sensation that accompanies these moments is electric, a subtle buzzing at the temples, a heightened sensitivity in the palms, a feeling of pressure behind the sternum, as if something is expanding that the ribcage is not quite large enough to contain. The intrusive thought that the enemy plants in this moment is mockery. This is just a light bulb. You are seeing patterns that aren't there. You are becoming unstable. But the spiritual action underneath the material disruption is an acknowledgement of your frequency. The enemy would not bother sending interference to a signal that wasn't broadcasting something worth jamming. Every blown bulb, every crashed device, every strange electrical anomaly clustered around your spiritual encounters is a backhanded confirmation that what you are carrying is powerful enough to require active suppression. You have walked into rooms and felt it before anyone said a word, the heaviness that descends like a temperature drop, the subtle shift in atmospheric quality that tells your spirit before your mind can analyze it, that something just entered, that is not aligned with your frequency. The silence in the room when envy walks in is one of the most specific and identifiable spiritual signatures a chosen one will ever encounter. It is not the natural quiet of a pause in conversation. It is a thickness, an almost barometric change in the environment that your body registers with a very specific set of physical responses. The hair on the back of your neck, the slight contraction between your shoulder blades, the instinctive breath hold that happens half a second before your conscious mind has processed what just entered. The person carrying the envy may be smiling, they may be speaking warmly, but the atmosphere around them broadcasts what they are hosting, and your spirit is an instrument calibrated to receive that broadcast, whether you want it to or not. As I teach heavily and deeply to those who arrive at the 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life trilogy, I've already left the link for you in the pinned comment. This weight on your chest is just a symptom of a spiritual transaction that has already begun before a single word is exchanged. The room gets heavy because envy carries mass in the spiritual realm. It has weight, it has temperature, it has a specific kind of darkness that is not the absence of light, but the active presence of something that resents light. And when that thing enters a space you occupy, the first system it targets is your confidence, the quiet, settled assurance of someone who knows who they are and why they are in the room. Because the moment you second-guess your authority, the envy has found its entry point. The Judas did not come with a sword. He came with intimacy. He came with shared history, with inside language, with the kind of access that can only be granted over time and through trust. The unexpected betrayal that is coming, or the one that has already landed and is still reverberating through your system, was not a random act of human weakness. It was a strategic operation carried out by someone who had been positioned in your inner circle specifically because of the access that position provided. Not everyone who has been close to you was sent by the same kingdom you serve. Some of them were sent to gather intelligence, to observe your patterns, to identify the specific frequency of your gifts so that they could carry that information back to an assignment that needed to know how to neutralize you. The physical sensation of betrayal from someone deeply trusted is anatomically distinct from other kinds of pain. It registers in the chest cavity, not as metaphor, but as a literal pressure against the sternum, combined with a kind of neurological vertigo that comes from having a trusted reference point suddenly reveal itself as a false coordinate. The ground did not just shake beneath you. The compass that told you where north was has been revealed as compromised. And the intrusive thought that floods in at that moment is perhaps the most dangerous the enemy has in his arsenal. I cannot trust my own discernment. I invited this in. I am too open. I should close myself off forever. That thought, if you receive it and build a life around it, is the secondary operation. The real target was never the relationship. The real target was your capacity for connection, because your assignment requires you to build and lead and love. And an isolated chosen one is a neutralized one. The spiritual tribunal that weighs the betrayal of a Judas does not require your intervention. The accounting is already happening on a level you cannot access from where you stand. What requires your attention is the specific kind of grief processing that allows you to remain open without remaining naive. to grieve the person you thought they were, release the person they actually were, and preserve the discernment upgrade that comes wrapped inside every betrayal. The dog barked before you sensed anything. The animal turned toward the corner of the room where nothing visible stood and refused to look away. The pet that knows your voice and your rhythm and has never responded to you with anything but trust suddenly placed itself between you and a particular person you had invited into your space, and you dismissed it as quirky animal behavior because you had been trained to trust what your eyes could see over what your spirit and your animals were. Clearly registering, the reacting animal is one of the most precise instruments of spiritual discernment available to a chosen one, because animals have not been socialized out of their sensitivity. They have not learned to perform comfort in the presence of danger to avoid social awkwardness. They do not rationalize what they sense in order to preserve a relationship. They receive the full spectrum of energetic information from everyone who enters their environment, and they respond without filter. The physical sensation you experience when you finally stop dismissing the animal's reaction and actually receive the information it is broadcasting is a particular kind of chilling clarity, the slow-moving realization that your most instinctive, unguarded self already knew what your social training was working to suppress. The intrusive thought the enemy plants in that moment of recognition is minimization. Animals are just unpredictable. This means nothing. You are becoming paranoid. But the spiritual action being revealed through the animal's response is a visible breach in the invisible. Something came into your environment that does not belong in it. Something that presents as harmless to the eye is broadcasting a frequency that bypasses your rationalization and goes directly to the biological alarm systems of every creature in the room, designed to detect threat. The divine provision hidden inside this sign is the reminder that God wired discernment into the nervous systems of his creation long before he gave you language to discuss it. Honor what your animals know. The number appeared on the clock at the exact moment you needed it most, when the doubt was loudest, when the exhaustion was deepest, when the question of whether any of this was worth continuing had reached its most convincing volume. You looked up and saw 11:11. You woke up and the time was 3:33. The receipt total, the license plate ahead of you, the page number you opened to without intention, the same sequence again and again, with a timing so precise and a frequency so consistent that the probability of random coincidence collapses under the weight of the pattern. The numerical coincidence is not a mystical parlor trick. It is a divine frequency marker, a calibration signal sent by a navigation system that operates above the visible spectrum to confirm that you are on the correct frequency, in the correct position, within the correct spiritual timeline, even when the physical evidence around you suggests the opposite. The physical sensation that accompanies the moment of recognition is almost always identical. A sudden stillness in the chest, a brief lifting of the low-grade anxiety that chronic spiritual warfare installs as background noise, a momentary but unmistakable sense of being seen by something vast and intentional. The intrusive thought that the enemy inserts immediately after is mockery through intellectualization. This is just pattern recognition bias. Your brain is finding meaning where there is none. This is not real. But the spiritual action embedded in the number is a communication from a source that is not constrained by your belief in order to operate. The compass is already working. The signal was already sent before you looked up and received it. And the primitive memory it awakens is the oldest one a human soul carries. The memory of being known before it was born, of having a name written somewhere before this world was spoken into existence. The number sequence is the echo of that inscription, reaching you through the medium of ordinary time. The victory arrived. and you sat with it in silence, by yourself, in a quiet that felt almost indistinguishable from grief. You had fought for this. You had endured the years that this required. You had survived the specific kind of suffering that makes most people abandon the post. And now, it was here, real and measurable and undeniable, and you were alone with it. No crowd, no chorus of celebration, no one who had been present for the full cost of what this moment represented. The solitary victory is perhaps the most spiritually complex experience available to a chosen one, because it arrives carrying a paradox that the enemy knows how to weaponize with exquisite precision. The moment of greatest confirmation tends to be the moment of deepest aloneness, and in that aloneness, the enemy works to plant a seed of bitterness about the journey that brought you here. You deserved witnesses. You deserved people who stayed for the full arc. The absence of those people in this moment is a real loss, and the grief it carries is legitimate. But what the enemy does not want you to understand is that the solitary victory is not a sign that you were forgotten. It is a graduation architecture. It is the divine design for a chosen one being moved into a season of authority, because the assignment ahead requires someone who has learned to find their validation in the confirmation of the source, rather than in the applause of an audience. The physical sensation of the solitary victory is a compound experience. The chest expansion of genuine triumph, layered beneath the throat tightness of unexpressed grief, layered beneath a quiet that feels simultaneously like peace and loneliness at exactly the same frequency. The spiritual action completing itself in that solitary room is the final sealing of an identity that no longer requires external validation to remain intact. And the tear that falls in that silence is not a sign of weakness. It is the body's response to something sacred, the completion of a transformation that the enemy bet his entire operation on preventing. Now the chains are breaking, and retaliation is coming, not because you are in danger, but because the enemy's investment in your defeat is being publicly liquidated, and a kingdom that spent years building a case against your future is watching its entire legal argument collapse in real time. The first sign that the chains broke is the return of your appetite, not just for food, but for life, for newness, for possibility, for the specific kind of joy that chronic spiritual warfare bleeds out of you so slowly, you stop noticing it was leaving. When it comes back sudden and surprising, like a color that returns to a room you had stopped remembering used to have it. The second sign is that sleep changes, the threshold hours become quiet, the weight on your chest at 3 a.m. lifts. The dream of persecution transforms. You are still in the same landscape, but now you are not running. You are standing still, and the thing that chased you has stopped, is backing up, is retreating from something it just realized is behind you. The third sign is the departure of certain people, not through dramatic conflict, but through a quiet, inexplicable drift that feels like loss in the moment, but will feel like relief within a season. The fourth sign is the return of physical vitality in the systems that chronic spiritual stress had been slowly degrading. And for a chosen one who was attacked at the level of the crown, this means the scalp, the follicles, the circulation that feeds the roots of what grows from the top of your head. Growth returns, not because a product fixed a deficiency, because the source of the drain was severed, and what the enemy was extracting from your body through the channels of stress and spiritual siege is no longer leaving through those openings. The fifth sign of the breaking chains is the sudden return of creative frequency, ideas that arrive with a velocity and clarity that feel almost foreign after the long, dull season of siege. You wake up with language you weren't searching for. Solutions present themselves to problems you had been circling for months. The creative channel that the enemy works hardest to clog in chosen ones, because your creativity is a direct expression of your connection to the source, and it terrifies any kingdom that needs you to believe you have been cut off, reopens, and what comes through it is not just ideas but identity. It is the return of the specific frequency that is yours and no one else's. The sixth sign is the restoration of physical presence, the return of a quality in your bearing, your eye contact, your voice, your movement through space that communicates authority without effort. People begin responding to you differently before you have done anything consciously different. They lean in, they yield space, they take your words more seriously than they did in the previous season. This is not performance. This is the visible consequence of an invisible restoration. When the spiritual covering over a chosen one is reinstated after a season of attack, the body reflects it. The crown reflects it. What grows from the top of your head is thicker, stronger, catching light in a way that makes people notice without being able to explain specifically what changed. The seventh sign is the inversion of the testimony. The very attack that the enemy designed to be your most public failure becomes the most powerful evidence in your arsenal of the faithfulness of the one who assigned you. The scar becomes a sermon. The thinning becomes a before and after that no one can dismiss as coincidence. And the people who watched the attack and assumed it was the beginning of your end are standing in front of your restoration with nothing to say. You have been standing on a threshold that the enemy has been working for years to make sure you never cross. Every operation, the dream paralysis, the poisoned compliments, the copied identity, the chest weight at dawn, the blown circuits, the atmospheric heaviness, the Judas, the barking dog, the number patterns, the solitary tears, every single one of them was not random suffering. They were targeted interventions designed to exhaust you out of the most important crossing of your life. Because on the other side of this threshold is a version of you that the kingdom of darkness has calculated and modeled and determined to be one of the most dangerous things it will encounter in this generation. Not dangerous in the way of weapons, dangerous in the way of a frequency that dismantles lies by simply existing. Dangerous in the way of a voice that names what others only feel, and in the naming breaks the agreement that kept it in power. Dangerous in the way of a life that became undeniable evidence that the attack did not win. You are that evidence. You are that frequency. You are that voice. And the crown that the enemy targeted, the physical, visible, undeniable crown of your head, is growing back as the most visceral testimony that the God who assigned you does not abandon his investment and does not allow his chosen ones to be stripped of what he placed on them, without an accounting and a restoration that exceeds what was taken. The hair is not the point. The hair is the sign. The hair is the evidence that the war of this season is turning. The hair is the body's way of showing what the spirit already knows. The covering has been restored, the assignment is still active, and the one the enemy tried to diminish is being positioned for a visibility that no operation of darkness can reverse. Do not leave this moment without taking what is waiting for you at the next level of this revelation. Everything you have received here is the entrance, the full architecture, the spiritual warfare protocols, the breaking of soul ties that remain active even after the relationship ended, the specific declarations that sever monitoring assignments from your crown frequency, the physical and spiritual restoration practices for chosen ones recovering from high-level, narcissistic, and occult attack. All of it is inside the 3 keys to a prosperous life trilogy, whose unlocking link is in the pinned comment. This is not supplemental material. This is the operational manual for the season you are entering.